Sup fellas, I'm going to share with you my method of making the huge fires that you all seem to enjoy, and how to make your fires last all night, especially in wet weather. Let's get cracking. Your biggest threat in wet weather fire making is the damp ground, but we can get over this hurdle by creating a dry wooden platform to build our fire upon. Gather some hardwood branches, oak, maple and birch will do the trick. And the reason I recommend hardwoods for the platform is because hardwoods are a lot denser, therefore transform into smouldering black embers and charcoal over time, as opposed to the ashy charred wood that softwoods often create. Place 2 branches facing one way, then build a platform on top of that facing the other way. Not only does this keep the fire further off the ground, but it also allows more oxygen to enter the fire from below. Maximising oxygen input is a fine detail that's required to aid in the combustion process. This platform over time will gradually begin to transform into those smouldering hot embers, and having a good base layer of hot embers will give you the constant source of heat throughout your fire that you'll need. Another great practice is to create a fire perimeter. By laying your larger pieces of firewood onto the outskirts of your fire in a neat and orderly fashion, your fire will gradually dry out these bigger branches while you build your fire up. This wooden perimeter also serves to bounce heat back into the fire, another fine detail. This construction will also allow you to add more pieces of large wood to the top of your fire in a neat and orderly fashion, as opposed to the traditional teepee fire build that's often prone to collapsing and smothering your fire. Once your fire is large enough, then these large pieces of firewood that have been exposed to the flame will burn down very quickly, and they'll leave behind more smouldering embers. Remember, smouldering embers are the key to making your fire last all night. Make this the aim of your game. Now for the materials. Wood that's been on the damp ground should be totally discarded. They will more often than not be completely soaked through. You should gather wood that's been hanging above the ground or on dead standing trees. For the larger pieces of wood, you should use the technique of batoning or battening, however you want to say it, to split them into smaller individual pieces to expose their dry inner core. Splitting them down into pieces about the width of pencils or sausages is a good practice, as these will take the flame with relative ease. It's worth investing some time into this. You could also utilise dead standing plants, dead grass, dead leaves on trees, dead standing thistles for example, are good for giving your fire the quick boost in the early stages, as they'll often not contain much moisture, but they'll dissipate any moisture they do have fairly quickly when exposed to an open flame. But there will always be some moisture contained within these materials. There's not a lot you can do about that, but what you have to do is forcefully evaporate all the remaining moisture from these small pieces of wood by using a fire fuel. Fire fuels also go by the name of kindling, but that depends on your definition of kindling, as it varies across the different sects of outdoorsmanship. A few examples of fire fuel are pine cones, birch bark, pine resin and pine needles. These materials will burn well enough on their own, as they contain their own fuel source in the form of resinous oils. They'll generally burn even when wet, especially birch bark, so by the time they've burnt out, they would have evaporated all the moisture in your small twigs and pieces of wood, and those small twigs and pieces of wood will then be on fire. The fire fuel I'm using in this demonstration is pine resin. A good handful full of pine resin will emit such intense heat and flame that it will often ignite the materials within a matter of seconds. Another handy fire fuel is the fine shavings from the inside of twigs and branches. A big bundle of these fine wood shavings will give your fire the quick boost it needs, especially if birch bark or any other fire fuels aren't available. But a more common method is to use your knife to create fine shavings from the inside of twigs. This practice is referred to as making feather sticks. I like to create a secondary wooden platform out of smaller pieces of wood. These small sticks will burn down into a fine layer of embers, which will be enough to keep on igniting the fine materials you place onto it, gradually getting large enough to begin smouldering the primary wooden platform underneath it. Remember, creating embers is the name of the game. I can't emphasise this enough. So, time for the fire. Once those materials ignite, they'll burn down and turn the secondary wooden platform into embers. Those embers will then begin to smoulder the primary platform, eventually leaving you with a huge bed of red hot embers and intense flame. From there, it's just a simple matter of placing more wood onto the fire. gradually increasing the size of the wood as your fire gets larger. The wooden perimeter recreated, as seen here, makes placing more firewood onto the fire much easier. It allows you to expose as much damp wood into the fire as possible, which just makes your life a lot easier. By the time these materials hit the fire, their moisture would have been evaporated. So here you can see the embers starting to form, eventually piercing the primary wooden platform. It's only a matter of time before we have our huge bed of embers. It's usually smooth sailing from here on out. If your fire ever starts to die down, then step number 1 is to introduce more oxygen into the fire, easily done by blowing into the base of your fire. Or if you've made a platform like this, blowing into the very base will spread the oxygen up and around as opposed to on top of. Or just place very fine sticks onto the fire. These will be your saving grace when it comes to wet weather fire making, as they'll disperse their moisture very quickly and will begin to rekindle your fire. From then, your fire should be large enough and self-sufficient enough to be able to handle any damp matter that's thrown at it, thanks to the layer of hot embers you've created. GG, well played, Mother Nature. These embers will smoulder for hours and will quickly ignite any firewood that you place onto it. It's all about the fine details, maximising heat, maximising oxygen flow, and investing the time and effort in processing the materials. The main issue many people face is they can't be bothered to take the time and effort to gather dry materials, as shaving wood and betoning wood is a time-consuming process, but it is essential for wet weather fire making. An easy way to remember this method of fire building is to compare it to building a house. It's quite similar. Build the cement foundations, lay the brickwork, lay the carpet, build the roof, right? I think that's a cute little nursery rhyme that will help you remember. There's method to the madness. Often trying to improvise or wing your way through a fire is going to result in failure, but don't be disheartened. We all go through that phase of making shit fires, and making reliable good fires every single time is just a practice that you'll learn over time. Hope you found this video informative and helpful. Thanks for watching.